you are a new MPB DM, you are asking, well, how do I run this game? What do I do? How do I do this and that? Well, the last video went over a whole lot of operations that you can do as DM to facilitate combat. And went through a lot of really common things. We talked about beginning an encounter, ending an encounter, killing a monster, these three here, and a few other things. We won't rehash that in this video. We will go to new stuff, which we didn't look at before. Chain skill check. I'll be honest, I don't use this very often. What this is say you want everybody to do an endurance check. This is an easy way to ask them to do that rather than say, okay, everybody click on skill check and then do a check, which is fine. That's fine. That's just as valid because in their quick group, they do indeed have skill check right there. So the way you ask them in a more civilized way is you can say chain skill check and we can click endurance, say okay. And what's going to happen is it's going to use a internal function called send macro. This is really, really important to understand. So listen closely. What happens with send macro? It's very simple to explain, but very powerful to use. And the simple explanation is if you want somebody to run a macro, then you just use send macro. For example, let's say this is a very typical example, a word power, like healing word, for example. You want the other guy, the guy you're casting it on, to spend a healing surge. Send macro is used for that. It says, hey, you over there, I'm giving you a healing surge. It takes the surge macro on the MPB and it sends it to that token. So when that happens, it pops up on the screen of that player who's going to be spending the surge a prompt. Hey, do you want to spend a surge? That's how that works. Very powerful and very useful because say you're a warlord and you need to give a basic attack to one of your teammates. You can use send macro for that. And it will send an M melee basic request to that token, which will pop up on that player's machine. It's not doing it now because I'm the only player, so it's saying, well, wait a second, if you're the only player, I don't need to pop anything up. I will just give you a blue link in the chat, which we will get regardless of whether there's one player or 15 players. So even if you say cancel to that skill check prompt, which pops up on your screen, you can still go to the chat window and click on this link to run it manually. And it says run skill check from live clone macro police box. Yes, we do want to run that. And it's going to say, notice how it knew that we want to do an endurance check. So that's kind of cool. It didn't ask. So 1d20, and I guess he has 0 for his endurance score. Otherwise, we'd see it here. In this breakdown, you won't see terms with 0 because there's no point in displaying them. They're 0, so we don't need to display. So we'll say okay there, and it does the endurance check for us, and it actually sends that to info as well. And that was for the info token, so that's why it had a 0. The other blue link here, that's probably Vanny's, so it's actually not going to tell you that in the chat. So we'll say yes, and there we do have an endurance score of 6. So if one doesn't work, then do the other. The reason we got multiple is because I own both the info token and the Vanny token. So my endurance check, it says input values for Vanny. Should have noticed it said input values for info before, but it does that and it gives us a little frame which we can reference because I mean, you can look at it in the chat window too, but in an actual game session, information is flying by in here, so you can't really see that. So it gives you this frame so you can chill, relax, and look at it at your own leisure. So yeah, and it shows the previous checks there, notice that, but it does indeed show our endurance check was 19. Very cool. So we'll close that there. close overlay we've already seen. We have a black screen. And find effects for state. Say you have a guy who's, and this has actually happened in our games, it's come up, we see one of the tokens has the CA state on him. And we're looking at this and we're saying, hey, did anybody cast anything that grants combat advantage? And everybody shrugs and they say, oh, I don't know why that's still on there. So the way we can find that out, we don't have any CA states on any of these tokens. We can act, but we do have the deafen state here. So let's actually try that out. We can go click, find effects for state, and it will show us all the deafen states everywhere. Deafened. Say okay, and we'll look in the chat. Look at this. It's found it. It says, well, if you want the deafen state, I found this effect, Media Unsubscribe AC on Bony Guy Blue. Remember we talked about effects and how they get registered on different tokens. You can be the owner effect, but not be the recipient, the victim of an effect, for want of a better term. In this case, we find that he is both. Bony Guy Blue is both the owner and the recipient of Media Unsubscribe. But if it found deafened on any of the others, but it's not showing the state, it'll show us that too, which is useful because we need to know where something came from if we're going to end it. So if we say, oh, wait a second, that guy's not supposed to have that state on him, we know where to actually go for the saving of that state. It has been saved on Bony Guy Blue. So we will click on Bony Guy Blue, do the OSP, Object Selection Procedure, and we'll use this macro here, remove effect, and to get rid of it. But before that, we say, wait a second. What if we want to see what's involved with that effect? How has it been configured? We can use show effect for that. And look at that. We get all the parameters, all the headings, shall we say, and the values for those different headings. So the state, of course, we know that is deafened because that's what we asked for. The link value in the effect configuration is set to Media Unsubscribe. By default, it is the name of the effect, the real name, not the system name, which is given at the top there. The registrar, this is Bony Guy Blue. He's the one that registered the effect because he's the one that ran it on himself at duration toggle. So if you run it again, it will end. But for this illustration purposes, we won't have that option, let's say, and we want to remove. So we'll click remove. It says, well, do you want to do that one? And we say, okay, and look at that. It disappears. The state is gone, and we get some information here saying, yes, it has indeed been removed. So that's what that's for. And global toggles, we talked about that extensively. Mass force move. This is a dubious value because usually you're only moving one token at a time and your power has been programmed that way. But what if the importer missed that, or you're in a multiple move situation which has not been programmed for you by the importer? What do? Well, we have to move them manually. Yeah, you could say, hey, Mr. DM, move this guy here over here. But what if he's getting chips or something, or he's gone to the washroom? You want to, or the DM says, no, listen, you know where you want to move him. Why don't you manually configure that while I need to step away from the keyboard? And we can do that. We can model that behavior. We'll also see this in later videos for visitation attacks and actually recording positions. So we want to move red from here to here, but your power didn't do that. So we need to actually manually configure a move for this situation. So what we want to do is, once again, do OSP, select multiple tokens. We can do that by that rectangle there. So both of them are selected. And while they're both selected, we can go to the selection panel, go to the ABOS group, and say take FM snapshot. FM stands for forced movement. We get some information in the chat. It says name, Bony Guy red, and the actual X and Y coordinates on the battlefield, which he will get moved to. And we also want to move, for whatever reason, blue. Let's say we want to move him closer. So we will do that. There's no separation limit. You can move them 15 squares away if you want to. Select both of them, and once again, take FM snapshot. And it records that position as well. Watch what happens when you say to your DM, DM, I'm ready. I have programmed all the move operations that I want to do. Do mass force move. DM says, no problem. So he goes here, and he says, mass force move. Before I click it, keep your eyes on the positions of red and blue tokens. Watch this. You see that? They both get moved. You can do that for 10 tokens if you want to. And again, it's up to you how you want to run your games. If you want to say to your players, no, you can figure it yourself and I'll do mass force move for you, then that's fine. Or if you want to just negotiate with your DM and say, no, listen, just, and just use the space bar to point, move this guy over here, that guy over there, yada, yada. That's fine too. I'm not going to tell you how to run your game. I'm just here to give you the tools to do it. You decide which ones that you want to use. All right, mass force ownership, or not mass force, mass ownership right here. We want to do that next. Say Vanny has a bunch of spell tokens. We'll see that in later videos. And he's not been assigned ownership. Or the much, much more common scenario, Bill, the gentleman I told you about earlier, he couldn't make it this time. And we need somebody to play his characters for him. Say he's playing all three of these tokens, whether they're regular player tokens or spell tokens, whatever. And we don't want to, you can go double click and then go ownership. And then if Bill is listed here, click on him and say okay, and he is now in control of Bony Guy Red. We can do it that way, but say there's and this has happened, wizards can have dozens of tokens if they're high level. That's crazy. That'll take forever going through and setting all of those. It's much, much simpler with the Macro Police box. You can click on the MPB and then OSP everybody. Actually, we don't want to do the info token, so we'll get him out of there. So we will click on the MPB and hold down the shift key. Select all these guys. And that'll do the ABOS. Well, let's see if it does the ABOS as well. And we can scroll down until we get to mass ownership. And it says new or Dave. And let's say, since Bill's not connected, it's not going to give us the option of Bill. So we'll say okay for new. And when he does connect, he'll be an option, but let's just illustrate how this new works. And we type in Bill, say okay. And then it'll go through, as it says in the chat here, and set those ownerships. So let's see if that actually worked. Yes, it did. Bill is now the owner. Mass ownership. Very cool. Mass PC ignore? Not so cool. I don't know why I wrote this. I never use it. But basically what happens is if you run that, you can set which PCs are targetable or not. And there you go. It's actually giving an error. So no love lost there. We don't need it anyway for most situations. I'll look at that, fixing that for a later edition of the MPB if the spirit moves me. Again, not very useful. But mass set property, this can be useful. Say the default is XP. It's the same thing as ownership. Say you want to set a whole number of properties, the same properties on multiple tokens. A very typical usage of this, the way I use it the most, is to OSP a whole bunch of PC tokens. Let's just do Vanny here. So both of these are selected. You can see by the red and the white around both those boxes. We can go mask set property, and the default is XP, as you see up there. OK is off the screen, but that's fine. And it's saying enter value for XP. And you say to your players, well, everybody should be at 1000 XP at this point. You can set them all at once. Okay. It's only Vanny. He's the only party member now. But there's that. Another common usage is altitude. Say everybody has to be at altitude 3. You can select everybody, run mask set property, select the altitude property up there, and then put in a value of 3 when it asks you to enter value, and it lifts everybody up rather than running altitude individually on all those tokens, which will take forever. So it's up to you. If you want to see them go individually altitude, then who am I to, because it'll check, remember, it checks the ceiling because it has to be below the info token, whatever the altitude of the info token is. So that's that. We didn't see mass surprise, but we can do that now. And it says begin encounter first. So why don't we do that? We can click begin encounter, say okay, and no targets found within range. Okay, so no problem. Let's see, mass surprise, that still doesn't work. So but if it does, it'll ask you for the sides that are surprised and take things from there. So actually, I think the reason why is because they don't have the reticle on them. So we will go state system reticle. By the way, don't set states like this. They'll just get cleared. So we'll see if that actually happens when we put the green triangles back on them. And sorry, that was the wrong one. So we'll go to state again, go to system, initiative. All right, so green triangles are back. Does it work this time now that we're actually it won't, because we're not in combat. The first guy has not appeared there. So let's go to mass surprise. Okay, so don't worry about that one. That's in the documentation anyway. Message players. Say you have a bit of text which you need to send to your players. We'll say message players. It gives a title option, which you can change if you want to. That's the frame title, which will pop up on their screens, and also a message. And that's my little joke there. Hopefully you don't need to say that to your players too often, but you can change that too, of course, to whatever you want. You can paste in the italicized text for the description of the room that they're in, for example. We'll say okay there. And yeah, that's not going to work because it's to players and we don't have any players. So move party to info, we've seen. It will send everybody to the info token. It's a good way of congregating your tokens, your PC tokens, easily to the starting point of your map. And move party to next map. That just moves all the tokens to another map. We don't want to do that because we want to see what's going on in this map. Quick start encounter. This is kind of useful. It will okay, so it says no targets found within range, and whenever you're having trouble with the MPB, try resetting it by going reset MPB, and it will put it back to the basic thing that it's supposed to be. So oh no, not mass. We don't want to do quick start encounter, and select equals all. Okay, note these options are active. And yeah, they have to all be in rest state in order to do that, I recall. So we've seen remove effect, we've seen reset just now, restart we've seen. Reveal not visible to players. That's if you want to, if something is not visible, then we can set that actually a trigger value and it will run it, like for a secret door or something like that. If that door is set to this one is visible to players, if we set that off and we go reveal not visible to players, it'll say, well, I've found these ones that are not visible. So we say, yeah, we want to reveal that. If you want to do a whole bunch at the same time, like we'll set that and we click here and look, it says visible to players. So that's how that works. So there we go. There, search macro code. This is handy if you say, you know what, I remember configuring a macro that does radiant damage, but I don't want to go looking through all the macro code on my library token. So here to see what does radiant. So I can go search macro code through a library token for live Vanny, let's say okay, and we can type in radiant and see if we have anything. And oh, look at that, we do have something. I thought he didn't have any, but that's good. We have found something. Chromatic Orb has the radiant keyword in it. It doesn't have to be a keyword. It could be something else. Like I could put in sparkle if we want to know where we remember those two ones that we got from Sparkle's Live Sparkle. Those two powers, that'll come up here too. So it can be anything. It'll search all the macros on that library token for the search term, and it'll report them here as well as all the macros and their size. In case you're getting Stack Overflow, you want to see, hey, that size is too big for that macro. It's causing the MPB to choke. That's what that's used for. And yes, send macro I have described. Again, very powerful. You don't usually use it on its own. You can if you want to. That's what chain skill check does, but that's specifically hard-coded for the skill check macro. Show effect we've seen. Start timer. This is pretty self-explanatory. If you want to start the timer for that, remember those annoying messages we're getting, hey, you're taking too long? You can reset that, start the timer, and say, okay, finish your turn as fast as you can and do end turn, and it will start the timer from that point rather than the default, which is when you start your turn. Tally map NPC XP. This gives us all the tokens, the NPC tokens on the map, and watch this. It's going to go through all of them, say okay, and look at their XP values and give you a grand total. So if you are designing an encounter and you want to know, well, how much XP value is this total so far, this is very handy to do that. So we can do that. Validate we've seen, and write SPT is if F4 isn't working for whatever reason, we can go write SPT and we can actually put it on a token that doesn't have it. Let's just put it on the ABOS for fun. And macro define arrow ABOS has macros on it. So you can't do this on any token that has macros on it. So we can go to the window here and display our library. And if we do a blank token, this Alip that we have here, we can go write SPT to the Alip and say okay. What that's going to do, it's going to write setup player token on that token, and it has one macro right now. And we can go setup player token, and it asks for it. So that's if F4 doesn't work for whatever reason. But remember the bug that I explained where you have to click on the MPB when you load the campaign file? That's usually the reason. But if you can't get it done, whatever, then here you go. That's how you start off your import. And those are all the root group macros that help you run the game. Hopefully you'll find that informative, and thanks for watching.